everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Structure. I am Elle Stone, aka the Ancient Ninja. As you see right here in my corner is my little Wolfie. Little Wolfie. Kind of brings the mood all together. So today's topic is going to be about the very first Bible. It's something that I don't think a lot of people know about, and Marcion, the person who canonized the very first Bible, I haven't ran across a lot of people that are familiar with him either. So I wanted to take the time to kind of go into a little bit about his history and who he is, and how Marcion and the very first Bible really kind of give us a telling of just how corrupted the King James Bible is, and how much has been left out and how much has been included. So yeah, it's a piece of history that was essentially buried by the Roman Catholic Church, by the Vatican, Jesuits, that whole trope. So it's interesting to look at this and learn about him and know just how much of our history has been left out, so we don't have a open mind on things. And in this time, in the time that we're in right now, I think it's so essential that we are opening our minds up and breaking those chains, so to speak, metaphorically, so we can really see things from a unbiased perspective and be able to fully understand ourselves and our divinity. And right now the Bible is a very, very big part of what everyone's talking about and what people are using to base all of their viewpoints around. So I think when we go into this and talk a little bit about Marcion and the very first Bible, it's gonna kind of hopefully open some eyes and make people see just how much canonization of the Bible now is really put together in a way that's meant to manipulate and control society. So yeah, let's get started. All right, so Marcion of Sinope was born in around 110 AD, which was not that long after Christ lived and died. He was born in the same area. He was born to wealthy parents, actually. Marcion was not poor. He was not like Christ, who was, brought up in kind of a impoverished situation. He was born to wealthy parents. He was actually a very well-respected member of the church, because Marcion would often make donations to the church. And as you know, today that still stands true. Donations are a great way to climb in the church, even if you don't live by a moral compass. If you have a lot of money, it can get you very far in the church, and far everywhere, I suppose, but especially in the church. That's why the churches are not taxed, and there's a separation between the government and the church, because it is so common for people to use that as a way of funding themselves in the geist of being good people. So Marcion, however, wasn't doing it in that way. He just was someone that was very strong in his faith, and he really did believe in Christ and what Christ stood for. So that is actually what prompted him to really look into the Bible and to have his own self-diagnosis of what he believed was the true version of the scriptures put together. Now, as you know, or if you don't know, now you know, this was before the King James Version was canonized. This was long before it was put together, marketed, and then shipped out to people. At this time, people were essentially just reading scriptures and, also coming down from the word of Christ who had just existed. So this was a time of great speculation for many, many people. And during this time, a lot of people did have thoughts, but they did not want to express them because the church owned everything. And the church really dictated what people could think and what they didn't. And if you dared be someone that go against their narrative, you were often either shunned, killed, whatever it was. So Marcion had built himself up in the church so well by donating that he, like I said, he's a well-respected member of the church. So when he came out and started discussing these things, it came as quite a shock to the Roman Catholic Church, and he was declared heretic. So, that was immediately, even though he was someone that was giving them all this money, and he was a big part of the Roman community, so to speak, the Roman Catholic community, him even coming out and saying, I think I have a different opinion on the scripture, they did not like it and they didn't want any part of it. So he actually wrote an antithesis about his thoughts and why he believed these certain scriptures were the most authentic, real version of the Bible, but it was not preserved. So to this day, we cannot understand Marcion's reasoning or why he thought what he thought. Really, all we have from him is his nemesis, people that disagreed with him, that wrote about him. There was actually a book wrote called Ad Versus Marcionum, which was written by Tertullian, who we'll get into later in a second, and kind of wrap that up, and you'll realize why I'm bringing that up. And also, I'm probably destroying the pronunciation of these names, but if you've come to my channel, you know that that happens, so you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Okay, so we don't know a lot about why he did what he did. There's just people that say this was his opinion, this is why he thought this. Of course, a lot of what he believed did line up with Gnosticism and Gnosticistic beliefs. So we can get a little bit of basis there and understanding just by studying other Gnostics. Now, of course, when you say that, immediately Christian communities and people of that sort, not that I like to sort people into any sort of community, but this is just a very common response, that Gnosticism is invalid. And I disagree so wholeheartedly, and that comes from over a decade of research. So he was very similar to a lot of the Gnostics, and as I mentioned earlier, in that time there were many people that agreed with him and had these thoughts as well, but they were too scared to express it on their own. So when Marcion came out and started saying all these things, he gathered quite a following, and it would then later be known as Marcionism, which became essentially its own religion. And it kind of, like I said, it coincides with Gnosticism a little bit, but it really focuses on Marcion's scriptures and what he believed. So what was the very first Bible? Well, it was just that, the very first canonized version of the Bible, with the scriptures that Marcion believed were the truest. Marcion completely disregarded the Old Testament. If you know anything about Gnosticism, if you've read any other ancient texts that were taken out of the now canonized Bible, you will understand why he discarded the Old Testament. This is not an uncommon understanding. In fact, if you look at my channel and go through some of my videos, you'll see that I'm inclined to agree with what he said. And I don't base anything that I know off of other people. A lot of these people that I'm talking about, I learned later on in my journey after I'd kind of established my thoughts on things, and it just more so enforced, okay, I'm not alone. There are other people that thought this too. So his reasoning for disregarding the Old Testament and keeping it completely out of the canonization was simply the fact that he believed the God that Christ talked of and discussed was not the same God mentioned in the Old Testament. That there were many, many different things about these gods, and that all started out in the Torah in Genesis when we kind of are introduced to this prison known as the Garden of Eden. And we kind of see a completely different character of a God in the Old Testament versus God in the New Testament, the one that Christ is praying to and speaking of. The first God is a very malevolent, vindictive, sacrificial God. The one that Christ speaks to is a loving God, a source of light, a source of energy, infinite love. So we see a very big difference, and I've had people be like, well, God changed what God thought. One, I don't think that the word God is sufficient. I believe that many people can be God, and that it's more of like an earthly human term. So yes, by that standard, yes, God can change and have different opinions. They can believe, oh, I want you to sacrifice one day, and the next day, you know what, we're done with that. Because that is a very humanistic quality, to constantly be changing and evolving. Now, a source of infinite light, love, and energy would never go down to that, because the way vibrations work and the way the vibrational fields work, at the top, which is what all would come down from, is only light, love, those type of things, higher, more powerful emotions that aren't dark or based in that. So that is why I definitely believe what he's saying, and what a lot of Gnostic beliefs and other ancient texts have said, right on par. And perhaps I can go into in another video what I believe in those terms. I won't get into it heavily in this video because I really want to focus on him. But so he only believed that 11 of the scriptures in the New Testament were actually accurate to what the Bible should be. Now, it's not that he believed that they weren't real by any means at all. Being real is not, something can be real and also be wrong, or not align with a belief system. So it's not that he looked back and he said, oh, these aren't real, these are fake, these aren't. No, he never thought that. He just thought, according to Christ and what Christianity should be, the scriptures he picked and that he went through and meticulously studied were the ones most aligned with Christ. And I will put a list of those in the description. I'm not just going to name them all off. You guys can go in there and look at the ones that he deemed to be, like I said, the most accurate to Christ. Now, he also had a very interesting claim that I find to be very accurate as well. When it comes to the disciples and the apostles, whomever that followed Christ, he did not believe that all 12 were accurate. So his reasoning for that is not that they were lying or that they were incorrect in their claims. No. It was that they had misinterpreted what Christ has said, because through their perspective, he was someone different than what he actually was. Because of this prophecy, because of the biblical hold on people's mindsets, they thought he was someone completely different than who he was. Therefore, everything they said and everything they thought and everything they believed and wrote and spoke upon wasn't actually accurate to Christ. Now, he only actually believed in one apostle, and that would be Paul. So, and it's actually, I find it very interesting that Paul was the only one that he found to be the most accurate, because I've heard so many people claim that Paul was like their least favorite, that they had a lot against him. A lot of people that are Christian and I guess study the Bible in that kind of mindset, believe Paul is the most inaccurate. So I think that was very interesting to see that Marcion actually thought the opposite. He thought Paul was the only one that really relayed the message of Christ accurately. So, and if you go back and you look at a lot of what Paul said, I have some thoughts on that, and I haven't studied all 12 of them intently, but I do know just by reading some of the scriptures that I've read and taking out some of the information that I have, I think it's very naive of us to just believe everything everyone says, whether it's true or not. You know, we can't just think, oh, well, because this person said they saw this, or that this was said or this was done, that it's true. Because just look at today's age. Compare it to today's age. How many times have you heard something someone said or someone did that was taken out of context, like a game of telephone? So it's not completely absurd to believe that the disciples or apostles aren't accurate and relay the message of Christ. So, Marcion, after he made these big, grandiose claims, he was exiled. And his work was destroyed, his legacy essentially forgotten. Until Tertullian wrote about him. The Marcion problem. Now, I find it very interesting when you look into Tertullian, which I'm definitely destroying that name, like I said. He was a Christian author, so he was very heavily involved in Christian literature, in the Christian community, and he was essentially a writer that was like so founded in his beliefs. Now, why did he have this strong enough hatred against Marcion to write books about him when, you know, Marcion's own work was destroyed and we don't get to hear from him? Well, not only because Marcion was coming at him with something that was contradicting everything he believed, which is common, right? You see that even if you're right or you try to present information, people who are very, very strongly like banded in their beliefs, it doesn't matter what you say, they do not want to think differently. And this was a big reason of why he did hate him. He also made the claim that Marcion was a Jew hater. And that is why he made all these statements about scripture and disciples and apostles and things like that, because he was a Jew hater. He hated Jews. So it's essentially the same classic argument of you know what I mean. How can I can't say words. I can never say words. That word is so hard to say too. Antisemitism? You're probably saying it right now, like, why can't she say that? I don't know. I just had some cucumbers. But it's the same argument coming even today, where it's like if you even talk about anything Jewish related or related, you know, to essentially the Bible, and you have something to say, well, you hate Jews. That's what it is. Anti-Semitic. That's what it is. That you're anti-Semitic. You know, so it's interesting to know that that was like their main argument against Marcion, and that he was anti-Semitic and he just hated Jews, and that was why he thought that. So yeah, we'll never know really Marcion's words and why he believed what he believed in detail, because he was buried in history, and they tried to make us forget him. Just like, I mean, it's a common theme we see with anyone that goes against the narrative. They're deemed heretics and they're exiled from the church, they're erased from history, and we inevitably don't learn much about them. I mean, we've seen that in history with people who weren't even religious based, like Nikola Tesla, you know, and all these great names. So that's why if someone has a reputation like that, it's so important to look into them and find out for yourself what it is and what's it about, because the powers that be, the darkness that looms, does not want you to think for yourself. It does not want you to understand all aspects of everything. They want you to have a very boxed in view and live in that way, because then you can be controlled easier. All right, well, I hope you guys liked the video, and if you know anything about Marcion or the very first Bible, feel free to drop a comment and let me know what you know. If you have any questions, ask. I'll link all my stuff below so you can go and do your own research on him. And as always, guys, keep it pointy.